Welcome to Building While Flying, a Sasha Group podcast where we interview business leaders about how they tackle challenges, stay resilient, and navigate ever-changing skies.
Welcome to Building While Flying. My guest today is Gesche Haas, founder and CEO of Dreamers Doers, an award-winning community and agile PR team, amplifying extraordinary entrepreneurial women. Dreamers Doers has built a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem of over 35,000 women globally. Prior to founding Dreamers Doers, Gesche held senior positions at several venture-backed startups in roles covering growth, strategy, finance operations, and business development. So thank you so much. Welcome to Building While Flying.
I'm so honored to be here.
We are super lucky to have you because I think you have a really tremendous story. I'm really excited for us to record today's episode and for us to hopefully open up your story to more folks in our network. So my first question was going to be about Dreamers Doers, but I actually want to hear about you first. So we've heard some of the categories, some of the topics that you've touched upon in your career, but tell us what you were doing that led up to Dreamers Doers.
Yes. And I love even rewinding a little bit more because one thing that you could maybe say different is that I was born in Eswatini. It used to be called Swaziland, Africa. My dad is German. My mom is Chinese Malaysian. And we moved around a lot. So I went from Africa to Germany, Malaysia, Singapore, Germany, Beijing, Hong Kong, New York. And now out of all places, I live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. So I like mentioning that because obviously we are who we are, not just on the professional side, but our whole life impacts us. It impacts what we're drawn to. And career-wise, I started out first in finance. I worked at a hedge fund for 5 years. And then as you read out, I worked at a few startups. But I think it's much more my upbringing and the different countries that led me to doing what I do right now. My whole life, I was fascinated with humans. And having lived in so many different countries, I just saw so many different versions of humans. So, I saw every imaginable possibility of that. And I think that's what, even at a young age, nurtured me as a community leader. But I will say, because sometimes people just assume I'm this outgoing person that always was good with people. And I'm actually flattered that people might even think that because I think I'm so socially awkward even after this day. But it was actually, I had a really hard time making new friends every time we moved. And I think I really had to hone in on that skill. But also it came from a place of maybe being even a sensitive human that had me just so focused on learning how other people work. So I'm a very introverted community leader. And I think that is actually not that uncommon. A lot of community leaders that I know are introverted.
I love it. I consider myself that. People don't believe it, but I'm just the pandemic, I think, showed many of us whether or not we were truly introverts or extroverts, or whether we were, for me, it was, I'm an introvert who's pretty good at being an extrovert when I need to be.
We pass.
We pass, exactly. So I'm in that camp with you. So it makes a ton of sense now, right? As I think through everything that I've read about you and your notes getting ready for this, it builds a beautiful path to Dreamers Doers. So tell us, what is Dreamers Doers? Who do you serve and what do you do for them?
Yes. So our official bio or tagline is that we are an award-winning community and agile PR team. But what does that actually mean? So we specifically amplify what we call extraordinary entrepreneurial women. And that can be broadly defined. So that could be your traditional founder. But even within that vertical, we're pretty broad. So it could be someone who's raised venture funding, someone who never intends to raise venture funding, as well as ecosystem players. So it could be someone who works at a startup or who is an investor. And the reason we have this human first approach is that we find that, especially as an entrepreneurial woman, our role evolves a lot. So someone who was a founder yesterday might have sold their company or maybe had to close it down, and that person evolves. So we really emphasize that individual that doesn't have a traditional 9-to-5 and that can really benefit from having other incredible women around her that help with problem solving and just figuring things out. And our community itself, one is it's highly curated. So we curate for two things. We say for women being impressive and values driven. So, and that's where also this human first approach comes. We found that it's one of the hardest things to do to curate for being values driven. I mean, even just saying that, how do you determine that?
Right.
And we obviously have approaches and I'm happy to dive into that. It's really hard, but it also pays off so much because you can imagine if you curate for women that really want to be there, that really want to support each other, because we have this emphasis on giving, but even giving can become transactional if you don't curate for the right individuals and they don't show up with the right intention. So one is that community part, and then the PR, we focus on that because we believe is a core part of creating systemic change. By changing who and what gets portrayed in the media, by having more women of color be in the spotlight, that really changes the dynamic of who reaches for leadership positions and who dares to change and build a company of their own.
So this leads to my next question. So you're wonderful at setting me up for the next question. You had decisions to make as you were building Dreamers and Doers, right? You can listen to that vision and mission of the organization. It could very easily describe a non-for-profit organization. That is not what Dreamers and Doers is, but you certainly had to think through that and make a conscious decision about what path you were going to go through. So tell us about that, but tell us about the other sort of like crossroad decisions that were key in helping Dreamers and Doers become what it is today.
Yes, and crossroads. I love that word because I was at so many crossroads. So even starting Dreamers and Doers, people ask me, how did you find this great idea? And it was actually the idea that found me because I felt so lonely as an entrepreneur myself. And everything changed the moment I joined forces with one other entrepreneurial woman. And after seeing what a huge impact it was having, I decided to go full-time on it, even though I resisted it so much. People were like, oh, you should make that your full-time company. And I kept saying like, no, this is not a business. It's a community. And these days, there's a lot of community businesses. But when we started nearly 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. So one crossroad was just like going all in, not knowing what this could be, but just knowing like I had to explore what it could be. Then when we were starting to build this, when we built this while flying, truly, because I was like, I have no clue what I'm doing. And up to this day, sometimes I still don't. But at that time, a lot of the input I was getting, and I was getting it actually from mostly men, and nothing against men. I love men. I'm married to a man. But like a lot of the advice was just like very specific from their perspective and their own experiences, right? And it was like, oh, you get a CTO, build this technology, raise funding, sell, and then do whatever you want to do next. And I had given up everything in my life to work on Dreamers and Doers because I genuinely cared about the women we were supporting. But I did take some of that advice initially. I had the CTO who's wonderful. We built out our own tech. We interviewed with Y Combinator. They flew us to Mountain View for an interview. And all of that just helped me realize that growth at all cost wasn't what I wanted. And I must say, like, there were many moments though. Like I was living in New York at that time, and I'd go to tech conferences and people would like size me up and be like, what project are you working on? Like, how many employees do you have? How much capital have you raised? And then when they didn't hear the answers that they wanted, because I hadn't raised and I didn't have employees at that time, they'd like find a way to sometimes politely and not so politely exit the conversation because clearly it wasn't like important enough to talk to them. And I can't say that like, I definitely that hurt my ego at that time, but I think just like very consciously deciding like, why am I doing this? And also embracing like what maybe the friction points might be. So from that point onwards, I decided consciously, didn't want to raise capital, decided we didn't want to build our own tech. We wanted to leverage existing technology and we wanted to monetize early, right? So yes, so maybe some people don't want to talk to me at a tech event, but are these the people I want to talk to, right? Like, and also I was self-conscious at that time because like there were so many other companies and some of them female founded that were doing similar things that were in the press that had raised yet another round and yet another round, yet another round. I'm like, is this path really right for me? Yet I can't get myself to take their path. And then coming full circle, a lot of those companies actually have faltered since. And so not only did they close down, but in at least 3 instances, I had outreach to me to inquire if I might want to take over some of those companies as a CEO. So, right. So like, and obviously not always is that the outcome and not always will you be quote unquote proven right with your path. But even if you never get proven right, like, is this the path that like you could, at the end of the day, can you look in the mirror and be proud of what you did? Even if you quote unquote on paper failed, will you still be happy that you took that path? Or if you did succeed in your path, will you hate what you did? Will you need like years of therapy to get over what you did? Is that really success in the end of the day? In my book, it isn't.
Right. Well, and this idea of like, you could do it somebody else's way and sure that might work, but you'll never know whether or not the way you intended to build it would have worked too, right? Like that's sort of the unexplored territory. And that's usually where the greatest rewards are, is going the road less traveled.
Totally. And going so against our own nature, against like what we are naturally like gravitating towards. Like, I think like there's a reason that we gravitate towards certain paths.
Yeah. There was something you said in your pre-production interview about really you had multiple ideas, right? And you've said in this conversation that this was the idea found you. I think that's very common territory for entrepreneurs, is like a bunch of ideas and you kind of want to act on all of them. But obviously we are limited in terms of time and other resources that we can dedicate to any given idea. So what made this idea in particular be the one that like called to you and chose you, and like where you decided to put your effort?
Yes. And I giggle because it was a process. I'm in like nearly 10 years into it. And I resisted the idea so much because even though I was working on, it was the one thing I couldn't stop working on. So while I had different business ideas and on paper, they weren't bad ideas. Some of them ended up being unicorns now. Ideas are cheap in themselves, right? Like it's the execution that really counts. And I've learned the perseverance because I couldn't persevere with some of the other ideas because as I was working on them, they kept iterating and suddenly it was a completely different idea or something else sounded more interesting. But Dreamers Doers was my kryptonite. Dreamers Doers, I was responsible for all the women that kept showing up for this community that I didn't feel like I could just walk away. And now we've hit a really amazing stride. But there were many, many times it was excruciatingly hard. For the first 2 years, I had zero income. And I went from being an investor at a hedge fund to running a Facebook group for a living, but I wasn't making a living. So there were many, many moments where I was wondering, like, why am I doing this? Yet I couldn't stop working on it. And I think that perseverance of like not stopping, even if it's really, really hard and you're questioning everything you're doing, sometimes is the key to just continue. Because like, if you continue and you just keep iterating, seeing what works and what doesn't work, eventually something will stick.
Love it. So you've talked about, right, the work that goes into curation of a community, right? So this isn't just like mass application and mass acceptance of people who want to become part of the community. There's an intentionality there. You have your methods for being able to determine whether or not someone is the right fit for Dreamers and Doers. It's counter to how a lot of folks think about growth, right? Because people think about growth as like scale, like more of what you're currently doing. What does growth look like for Dreamers and Doers, if not just more? Because you're selective and you're intentional about how many people at any given point, right?
Yes. I love that you brought up the point counterintuitive. And I dare to say that traditional approaches could be viewed as just as counterintuitive. Because yes, maybe there are a few things we could do and we could have bigger short-term growth, but I dare to say that it comes at the cost of long-term growth. And it depends on the type of company, but especially for something like a community, right? Like if we doubled our size, it would change the culture of the community because suddenly half of the people in our community have never been part of it. So doing it gradually is crucial for us. But I think for anyone who's trying to deliver quality, it's important and crucial. And people join because of the curation and the type of people that they get to meet. So for us, we love the slow and steady growth for two reasons. One, we believe it leads to more long-term growth, but it also means that we can build a sustainable company and sustainable team, right? Like we have so many examples of people being so burnt out. And especially if you're customer facing, you're off service, it's really hard to be genuine and show up as your best self if you have nothing left to give. And I say this as we're currently like working towards building an even calmer company. I think communities inherently are just like very, very, they can be very demanding of you emotionally and energetically. So I think it's so important to keep that in mind. Then for growth, we have increased prices over all these years, and we only increase them for new members because our reasoning is that our old members are the members that have really allowed us to get to where we are right now, where we can offer more and more. And that is very intentional because as we increase our prices, there might actually be even less people that we can access. But this is the right approach for us. When people ask me about community input, I also say that increasing prices and having really intense curation isn't actually the right answer for everyone, right? Like just being sure that like you want to have a more educational platform that's maybe less interactive and serve more people, then your answer might be less curation and then a lot lower price. So it's just like really being intentional on your why and then really like having the levers that you can pull and push and the decisions that you can make and your product really reflect your underlying strategy while being okay, obviously, even evolving your strategy over time.
Amazing. So who who would you say benefits from Dreamers and Doers, or like who are the types of folks you want to be bringing in who should raise their hand and reach out to you if they haven't heard about you before?
I love this question. So anyone building something who is a woman or non-binary individual, and this could be like building a company in most cases, but it could be building an accelerator or various other types, or being part of that entrepreneurial ecosystem as an investor. So someone, creating something from nothing, who really seeks and sees the value of doing this with other people, right? Because building something, you're doing so many things for the first time. And most of the time you don't have colleagues, or even if you do have a team,
right,
like you can't go to them for like everything, right? Like you have a different like role as a leader. So being able to leverage a diverse network of women that significantly exponentially increases your chances of success. And then anyone who can really benefit from PR. And I think a lot of women are like, oh, I don't want to be in the spotlight, or do I have enough to say? Like, if that are the things you're telling yourself, like, I think you're an amazing fit for Dreamers and Doers, because it's so important we do this. Like, it's important to show other people what we're doing, and then even for ourselves, getting that validation is so important.
You've brought up themes that come up for us all the time in these interviews, and also all the time in our conversations with our smaller clients at Sasha, which is, one is it's the loneliest job there is, I think, in being an entrepreneur, right? Like, it's your vision, you carry the weight of what you're building, right? There's that burden we carry, right, rightfully so, of like the team and sort of like feeling that sense of responsibility. And really only other entrepreneurs can understand it in the same way. And so I think having a community of folks, there's tremendous value in that. I love this idea of like, if you think you don't need to be in the spotlight, you need us more than anything. One of my go-tos in seminars that I've been doing is like, you actually need to tell people your business exists in order for your business to thrive, right? Like, there are so many options out there that if you're not hitting that drumbeat and like announcing it from the rooftops, you're doing yourself a disservice and really not giving your dream the opportunity to thrive. So I love that you've hit that theme as well. So we are coming to the end of our time. It flies. Our big question, right? You've indicated you're like, we're still building, we're still figuring out. I don't know. In what ways do you feel established at this stage with Dreamers and Doers, and in what ways do you feel like you're still building?
I feel established by hitting certain major business milestones. So once we had our first full-time team members and our second full-time team member, and then hitting certain revenue numbers, and then this and last year getting serious acquisition interests and offers that we actually declined. It just feels so good coming from a background where people were asking me how my little project is doing, right? So getting that external validation is awesome. And also not being a one-woman show anymore is just like amazing. And beyond that, I feel like we're so hard on ourselves, right? Like the areas sometimes that we think like we're lacking the most are probably the areas that we're actually not doing as badly, but we just like have this ability to find every little area that we could do better in. Currently, we're like doing a lot in terms of operations and the team because we've grown, and then just like it's so easy to feel overwhelmed and not know what to do. So I feel overwhelmed there, but we feel lucky. I feel lucky because we hire a lot of our own members. So we just hired someone to essentially become our part-time director of people's at operations. So the community has become my own superpower. But that's where I feel like I'm lacking, but also I'm taking some strides to address it directly.
Gesche, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. I'm looking forward to watching the continued growth of Dreamers and Doers, and also sending some folks your way.
Thank you so much, Maribel. It was such an honor.